Hello, and welcome to Mailin It, the official podcast of the United States Postal Service. I'm Karla Kirby.
And I'm Jonathan Castillo. Thanks for tuning in to the second episode in our Postal Inspection Service True Crime series, where we speak with U.S. postal inspectors about some of their most notable cases. Today, we're talking about something the Inspection Service sees all too often: romance scams. Romance scams are a type of fraud where a criminal or group of criminals create fake online personas that they use to attract romantic partners. Once they've gained a partner's trust, they then exploit the relationship by stealing from them. As if that isn't bad enough, the cases we'll be discussing in this episode expose an even darker side of romance scams.
Well, that clearly sounds like catfishing 2.0. Today, we'll be speaking with retired Postal Inspector Natalie Reda about one case that took a tragic turn. Back in 2020, an Illinois resident left her house mysteriously one day, only for her body to be found days later in the Mississippi River, miles from her home. We'll talk about how an online romance scam may have played a part in her death and how the Postal Inspection Service helped investigate the crime. Natalie, welcome to Mailin It.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Natalie, thank you so much for joining us remotely from Chicago. Could you quickly take us through the basics of the case before we drill down to the specifics?
Sure. Years ago, I was involved in an investigation that identified a victim by the name of Laura Kowal. She was a 57-year-old woman who was a retired hospital executive and lived in Galena, Illinois. In 2018, she became involved in a relationship that involved online dating through an online dating website. Things started off well with her and her online boyfriend and seemed to be going well until things took a turn for the worst. After Laura's death, things became clearer that she was involved in a romance scam and that she had lost almost $1.5 million.
That's a lot of money. So let's dive into how the story goes from an online dating to someone having their life savings emptied and how the Postal Inspection Service enters the picture. Natalie, how did you first get involved with this case?
In early 2020, I was contacted by an Internal Revenue Service agent, criminal investigator, as well as an Homeland Security investigator. Both had initiated contact with me because they were investigating an inheritance scam. The scam involved mailing form letters to intended victims for an inheritance scam. And the mailings are considered mass marketing fraud because of the number of individuals that they contact. The inheritance scam basically asks individuals to respond to this letter that is either from a loved one or from an attorney that was hired by a loved one or a relative. It was the Homeland Security and Internal Revenue Service special agents who spearheaded the investigation along with the DuPage County Sheriff's Department. And they looked into the investigation, learning that it involved also other scams such as business email compromise and romance scams. The reason that the Postal Inspection Service was contacted was because obviously the mail system is being used, but also they suspected a Postal Service employee was involved. The Internal Revenue Service and Homeland Security initiated an undercover investigation into the mailings, and the subjects of interest in the case led back to Illinois. The investigation involved the undercover sending an undercover mailing to the fraudsters, and it was a payment to the fraudsters for an inheritance scam. The Postal Service or the Postal Inspection Service was tasked with tracking that piece of mail and observing the mail being delivered. Laura's Kowal's name came up in the investigation because she was an individual who had sent money to the fraudsters' bank accounts.
So, Natalie, you mentioned an inheritance scam. What did that have to do with the romance scam that Laura got caught up in?
Well, oftentimes scammers utilize bank accounts for various scams. They're indiscriminate in what they send to a bank account. The bank accounts are just a means of funneling money from victims. And the bank accounts that we were looking at in the case of Laura Kowal showed numerous wire transfers, deposits, and money being withdrawn in what we dub as suspicious activity. Earlier in the year, the IRS investigator tried getting in contact with Laura Kowal to find out why she had sent the money, but Laura never responded to her phone calls. So by the time I had been involved in the investigation, it was already further along. We knew who the suspects were, but we hadn't contacted all the individuals who had sent money to the bank accounts. That's what I was tasked to do, and that's what initiated my call to Laura. I actually called Laura on a Friday morning, left her a message, never heard back from her, but I also spoke to Laura's daughter, Kelly, who ended up calling me back.
Wait, so Kelly just, gets this call out of the blue from you. I'm sure that must have been pretty jarring on her part, but did she know anything about the IRS's investigation at this point?
No, Kelly had no idea why I was calling and didn't know that the IRS had actually contacted her mom. When I called, I tried to explain to her why I was calling, but when you initially call somebody, of course, they're suspicious, or you at least hope they are. And Kelly was. Kelly actually said, I can't talk to you right now. I want to verify who you are. So I gave her suggestions on how she could verify my identity. That included calling a local post office, calling local police, going to a local post office, calling the 800 number for the inspection service, everything. Kelly ended up contacting the local post office and they were able to identify who I was. And so Kelly felt comfortable calling me back. So when she called me back, she immediately told me that she knew what this involved, what the money her mom had sent to the suspicious bank accounts involved, because she went back to an online relationship her mom had a couple of years earlier that her and her mom had a disagreement about. Kelly was suspicious of this online person and had expressed her concerns to her mom. So mom must have just stopped telling Kelly what was going on. When Kelly called her mom that morning, when I called her, her mom said, "Don't worry about it, Kelly. I'll call her back," meaning me. I never heard from Laura Kowal.
So you never heard back from Laura after speaking to her daughter, and she also didn't attempt to call you back?
No, Laura never called me back. And actually later that day, Kelly called me probably a couple hours later. She called to say that she couldn't get a hold of her mom and asked if her mom ever called me back. I told her no, I never heard from her mom. Kelly then said, "I don't like the fact that I can't get a hold of my mom. It's not like her. It's very out of character to be out of touch with Kelly." Kelly's dad had died 2 years earlier, and mom had changed her life dramatically by moving to Galena, Illinois, and then retired. So Kelly and her mom were in constant contact. And when her mom didn't pick up her calls or call her back, Kelly got suspicious. By the time lunchtime had hit that day, now it's still Friday when I called, it's lunchtime, and Kelly calls me to say, I think something's wrong. I'm heading to my mom's house. And initially I thought, well, that's a bit over the top. Why would you head out so fast? And Kelly said, I just have a gut feeling something's wrong and I'm going to my mom's. Now, Kelly lived about 2 hours away from her mom and just got in the car and said, I'm heading out. On the way, Kelly called her aunt, mom's sister, to say something's wrong, gave her an update about my call and everything else that Kelly was suspicious of. And mom's sister ended up meeting Kelly in Galena at her mom's house. So Kelly and her aunt show up at mom's house. Mom's house is closed, but the windows are open and the dog was left home. It was very uncommon for her mom to leave the dog home, much less for that many hours. Kelly couldn't get a hold of her mom and suspected her mom had turned off the telephone around lunchtime, which I think was one of the reasons that had raised Kelly's suspicion to, immediately go to her mom's house.
I can only imagine, how disturbing and, just downright scary that would have been for Kelly, not knowing where her mother went, but, in the back of her head, knowing that, her mother had been scammed. So what happened next?
Well, Kelly and the aunt sat for a while, I think, in the house and, just kind of waited for mom to come home. But now it's getting later in the day. And as it got closer to dinner time, Kelly calls me and says, I think I'm going to call the local police and file a missing persons. Kelly believed her mom had broken ties with the online romance or boyfriend by the name of Frank Borg. And it had been years, but Kelly back when she had confronted her mom was suspicious of this Frank Borg and told her mom so. So at dinner time, when she called the local police, she is reporting that her mom is missing and she doesn't know where she went. Local police said, okay, we'll get back to you. Call us if you hear anything. A little bit of time goes by, but the local police had done something proactive, which I didn't realize that they would do, but they pinged mom's phone in case there was something that they could find out her location and then alleviate any fears that mom was missing. Well, they had learned then, which we didn't know until many hours later, that mom had turned off her phone around lunchtime close to the Iowa border. Mom was in Illinois. She was going to cross over a bridge into the Iowa border, and that's when the phone was turned off. And I don't know if you're familiar with Illinois and Iowa. The Mississippi River basically runs between the two of them, and that's where the two states are separated. So Mississippi River is very prevalent up and down the west side of Illinois, and mom was crossing over the Mississippi River in an area that she didn't normally go to. So again, suspicious for everybody. Later that evening, the sheriff's department comes and Kelly starts explaining to the sheriffs why she thinks her mom is missing. And while Kelly was searching the house, she found a letter buried under paperwork in Laura's desk that was written to Kelly telling her that she was still involved with Frank Borg and that she had been leading a double life and that she didn't tell Kelly the truth about the relationship that she had with Frank. The note was amongst other documents such as wire transfers to foreign countries like China, and it reached into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't think at the time Kelly realized the gravity of what all that money meant, but she certainly found out later that it was a great deal of money. We learned over the course of the weekend that mom had not used her car through an iPass toll booth. Her cell phone records showed no activity. Kelly had access to those. Credit card information, we found out that mom had maxed out her credit cards months earlier, so there was no activity on those. And her bank account wasn't being utilized because it was pretty much empty. So over the course of the weekend, we got a clearer picture of what was going on with mom's finances. And we had no leads as to where mom was. Kelly was the one that actually went into mom's email account and found communications with this Frank that showed the romantic nature of their relationship and that it had been going on over the course of 2 years.
I'm curious, and I just wanted to go back really quickly to something that you had said a little bit earlier, which was, it sounded like Kelly knew from the get-go that this Frank Borg was, just not to be trusted. Did she ever mention to you, why she had that gut feeling, if she saw any red flags in that type of situation?
She didn't like the way her mom was acting within this online relationship. And Kelly had a bad feeling that this guy was a con man, but mom didn't want to hear about it. And so, Kelly and Laura had a disagreement about it. And then Laura told Kelly that she had broke it off with Frank. So fast forward to now when mom is missing, mom had sent all this money out of the country, but Kelly didn't know for what purpose. And she suspected it was all connected to this Frank Borg because of what had gone on with her mom years earlier.
So we had one person who could answer all the questions about where her money went, but we couldn't seem to find her. You mentioned, Natalie, that you were in contact with the police over the weekend, trying to locate her, trying to get more information on the case. What happened as that weekend closed out?
Over the weekend, I talked to Kelly countless times, and it went from morning to night for 3 solid days. By Sunday evening, the local county sheriff called me and notified me that Laura Kowal's body had been found by boaters on the Mississippi River and that she was deceased. Law enforcement believed that Laura most likely committed suicide, but the autopsy revealed that Laura's death was by drowning, and they had no other answers.
Was there anything in the car or anything that would have led law enforcement to believe there was foul play?
Law enforcement really had no idea what happened with Laura, but they did find that she had locked all her valuables in the car and found her car key fob and sweater by the edge of the river.
That is just a heartbreaking story. And obviously, we don't know all of the details in Laura's case, but what we do know is that romance and inheritance scams are very real. Let me ask you this, Natalie, how does Laura's case compare with some of the other romance scams that you've investigated?
Over the years, I have interviewed hundreds of romance scam victims, and they're not dissimilar to Laura's case, but for the fact that she ended up deceased. A lot of these victims are completely crushed by scammers asking for money that oftentimes some of these victims don't even have. Romance scammers often go to people's loneliness and search for love. They're looking for somebody who is vulnerable. And victims are hopeful. They want to find a companion or someone who cares about them. They're scammed because they fall so readily for somebody who flatters them, gives them attention, talks to them, and gives them hope. And these scams are indiscriminate. It doesn't have to be someone who is old or lacking in mental capacity. This is everybody. It's all ages. It's young and old. It's all education levels. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. These guys find a way to get into your life, and they intertwine themselves so well that the person being scammed believes that they know this person. Oftentimes, romance scam victims have never even met the individuals, and they've never seen them, even on video. So it's very scary to think that you would give up your life savings to somebody you've never met, but they do.
So I've looked at some of the numbers, and it looks like the Federal Trade Commission reported that more than 64,000 Americans were defrauded out of over $1.14 billion by romance scammers last year alone. So obviously, this is a huge problem. Was anyone arrested for either the romance scam or the larger inheritance scam in this instance?
Yes, there were 2 individuals that were foreign nationals living in the U.S., as well as the U.S. citizen who was also a postal employee. The 3 of them were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, and the investigators identified $750,000 in loss associated with the scam. The defendants, 2 pled guilty and 1 was found guilty after a trial. All 3 are awaiting sentencing at this point.
So what are some ways that our listeners can protect themselves and their loved ones from these types of scams?
First off, I think that education is the number one way to protect ourselves. Education, I can't stress it enough, is the only way that we are going to stop people from sending money to other individuals. It would be very smart to consider who you're talking with online, of course. Google their name, search their photos. You can take a photo off one site and drop it into Google, and it will show you where those images are related to. Look for things that are red flags, such as, yes, this profile has shown up in different accounts, maybe under different names. That's a huge red flag. When you're talking to somebody online, a dating site, through chat, whatever, initiate phone calls. If they can't make a phone call, you got to ask yourself, why couldn't they make a phone call? You can talk to your friends. Your friends have no problem talking to you. If these scammers give you an excuse that they're too busy, well, then they're not interested. Just move on. Find somebody else. Never date somebody that's supposedly out of town for work and just can't make it back to the States to see you. I think it is a red flag when someone isn't giving you their time. Video chats, yes, you can video chat with somebody. We do it all the time. FaceTime, whatever it is, you can protect the background. You can blur your background so they can't find things that would make it obvious where you live or personal information. If they can't get on the video, you have to ask yourself, why? If they use excuses like their video doesn't work, their phone doesn't work, maybe you don't even want to be dating somebody that can't handle simple tools of life like a phone that works. Those are all red flags. Do not send money to anybody you've never met in person. And even then, you have to question, why do you need to give this person money? You're adults. You both should be working. Do you really want to get involved with somebody who has all these problems?
Natalie, what would you say to anyone listening right now who thinks they might be the victim of this type of scam?
I would say talk to somebody about it. Even if it's scary, it doesn't have to be a family member because you're embarrassed. Go to a social worker. Go call law enforcement. They're going to at least take that information down. I encourage anybody who has lost money to report it to law enforcement. That could be through, the inspection services online website. You can call the inspection service. You can contact the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov. You can report scams to the FBI. Sometimes it's difficult when you go to local law enforcement and try to report a crime like this. They don't have the time to investigate every crime. But no, a lot of that gets compiled for law enforcement, and then law enforcement can follow the complaints to initiate an investigation. So I strongly suggest just filing any type of report, and maybe a church member, a family member, a friend will actually be more compassionate than you think about your predicament.
Well, thank you, Natalie. We also want to point out, like you mentioned, you can report these crimes to the Postal Inspection Service at uspis.gov, or you can call our toll-free number, 877-876-2455. We catch a lot of tips and complaints through our website, so it is a good resource. You can also use the website to learn more about how to protect yourself and your loved ones from these types of scams. Also, as Natalie mentioned, you can reach out to the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov or the FBI's IC3 online. And if you're not tech savvy, you can always call these government entities. They're all set up to take phone calls and online complaints.
Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great speaking with you.
Thanks for having me. It's such an important topic, and I hope people actually learn something from this.
Next up is one of my favorite parts of the podcast, the Did You Know segment, where Jonathan and I each share a little known fact about the U.S. Postal Service. I'll get us started. Jonathan, how much do you know about the original zip code campaign?
Well, I know it was a fairly large campaign to promote the zip code after the idea was first introduced at a postmaster's convention in 1962. At that time, the post office department was trying to avoid the same problem that AT&T had when it introduced area codes to phone numbers.
Right. Initially, the post office department was worried the general public would be unwilling to use the special codes on their mail. So the department decided to add personality to the campaign by introducing Mr. Zip.
Mr. Zip?
Yep, originally created by Chase Manhattan Bank for its Bank by Mail campaign, Mr. Zip is a cartoon mail carrier who emphasized that, in rain or shine, every piece of mail would make it to its destination, so long as it had the proper code on it.
Did Mr. Zip work? I mean, did the public like him?
The general public sure did. Unfortunately, though, he wasn't a huge favorite among mail carriers, many of whom felt insulted by the cartoon. Some were also worried zip codes in general would dumb down the profession, since they previously had to memorize complicated schemes representing towns, neighborhoods, and streets. One mail carrier from Fort Worth, Texas even said, "No letter carrier I have ever seen looked as absurd as Mr. Zip."
Based on how important zip codes have become, it seems like the campaign was a success, even if Mr. Zip got mixed reviews. For my Did You Know, I'll be sharing something I hope is much less polarizing than Mr. Zip. Karla, did you know that our friends at the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum sponsor prizes for U.S. scholarship focused on the history of the postal system?
I absolutely did not.
This year's professional prize went to Dr. Justin Gage for his book, We Do Not Want the Gates Closed Between Us, Native Networks and the Spread of the Ghost Dance. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Justin came on our podcast in August 2023. His research focuses on how Native individuals and groups came to take advantage of the Postal Service as a way to meet their needs and defend their cultures.
I do recall that. Justin was a great guest.
In addition to the professional prize, the National Postal Museum awards a graduate student prize. This year's went to Dr. Stephen P. Hay for his PhD dissertation entitled Distance and Difference, Seamen and the Maritime Communications in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the Atlantic World, 1730 to 1800. Dr. Hay wrote about the ways sailors on the high seas communicated, which sometimes involved the postal system.
Well, that's great. I'm glad postal history is getting the recognition it deserves. So, Jonathan, how about that? A scam that led to suicide?
Yeah, it was just so fascinating to hear Natalie retell this story of these romance scams, these inheritance scams, and just that darker side to it. Sometimes you think, oh, it's just about the money, and then it ends with the death of the victim. I mean, that's just terrible. It's heartbreaking. And
yeah, I definitely agree. And not only with the romance scams, but inheritance scams also. We definitely have to be in tune with our loved ones, especially older populations where they may be alone and they're looking for companionship, and online and via the mail may not necessarily be the best place to look for that companionship, or at least be vigilant about the relationships that you're starting online or via the mail. And that's all for this episode of Mailin It. Don't forget to subscribe to Mailin It wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss the next episode. And follow along on Instagram at U.S. Postal Service, X at USPS, and on Facebook.